for all security reasons, I wish to remain anonymous. So for now, you can call me John Doe. I'm here to tell you of my experience into the afterlife. An experience I wish I haven't undergone, along with 2 of my former colleagues. God bless their souls, and I hope like hell they get out of that miserable place. I suppose it was my fault their souls are now trapped in there, with those hideous things inside of it. I can only pray with my good faith that they receive salvation. Some of you may be wondering, what was the afterlife like? What was I doing in there? Well, this was something that was meant to be an experiment, to see if our existence could transcend the notion of physical reality and into what some people call heaven, hell, purgatory, or what some people refer to as the astral plane, or more specifically, the afterlife. But before I begin, I'll introduce myself with my background. As I said, you can call me John Doe, as I refuse to use my name for security reasons. My former colleague, whom I call Jane Doe and Jack Doe, were 2 of the best known people I've ever worked with for over 20 years. They're gone now, and I blame myself for it. It's been about 5 years since I left the facility without saying a word about the incident. But I believe now is the time to talk about my experience. I won't give you every detail of my experience, so I'll provide you with the most important parts. This all began when we were working together along with 37 other people in a top-secret military facility that deals with things humans normally pass off as superstition. Things like UFOs, ghosts, angels, demons, and other mythical creatures and things talked about. We captured very interesting evidence of some of this phenomena, particularly ghosts and UFOs. We even managed to capture the first crystal clear image of a skinwalker, thanks to one of our top secret hidden cameras in a forest that the Native Americans said was haunted by said entities. The creature looked terrifying, but that was nothing compared to what my colleagues and I had experienced during our time in the afterlife. 2 weeks passed at that time before it was decided that it's not enough to just get clear, irrefutable photos and recordings of such things. So, what if someone alive enters into that unknown realm? That was the question one of our superiors asked. It was then decided that we should see what it's like on the other side, the afterlife. A couple of scientists working in our facility introduced a new form of technology that allows one to go into the afterlife. It was a machine with a bed strapped to it, and it had 3 tubes with needles at the end of each of them. I didn't know their names at the time. One of the scientists explained that one of these tubes hooked up to the machine injects an unknown poison which is capable of killing a person in a matter of seconds without feeling pain, while another tube injects this unknown liquid which helps neutralize the poison. The third tube injects another unknown liquid that can help revive a person in a matter of seconds. They didn't say what this machine and the liquids are. As they said, it's top secret, and the machine is one of 3 prototypes. I suppose they planned for this moment. And just like that, I along with 2 aforementioned colleagues were selected to take part in this experiment. I was reluctant at first, scared in fact. I was hesitant to say yes. One of the scientists who was working on the machine told us 2 things. 1. The machine is guaranteed to work, as they have tested this themselves, and everything is working fine. 2. If one of us refused, we'll be serving time in the military prison, and we'll be worse off in there than we would be in the afterlife. Fine, I said. I didn't like the idea of being put in such a military prison, let alone putting my fellow colleagues in that situation too. So I reluctantly agreed, as did my 2 colleagues, Jane and Jack. We all laid in the bed strapped to the machines, and the scientists then inserted the tubes into our bodies. Luckily, they injected a numbing medication before they put it in. It would hurt like hell if it didn't. We all tried our best to stay calm while the scientists began activating the machines. After a couple minutes, the machines were ready, and the scientists gave us one last question. Keep in mind, I said this works, but I also said this is still a prototype, so there's a very slim chance that you might never come back from this. You got 15 minutes. Do you have any last words before we begin? Yes. If I don't ever make it back, please tell my wife and children that I love them. I said, with the chance I might never come back from this. Jane felt the same way, and wishes that her husband and children hear the same words. Jack, though, didn't have anyone on the other hand. I understood that he was a loner, and didn't have anyone close to in his life. So he said nothing. And the scientists shrugged it off. He was still a good guy nevertheless, and I respected him along with Jane. Very well, the scientist said, before activating one of the tubes. I noticed the poisonous liquid flowing through the tube, before reaching inside my body. I did not feel any pain, but I felt like my body was slowly becoming paralyzed. Good luck, were two faint words I could hear from the doctor's mouth. Before everything went dark, and I could see or hear nothing. Shortly after, I could see again, and I could see myself floating directly above my body. I turned to look around, and I could see Jane and Jack floating as well. And Jane looked down and was surprised to see her own body. Jack saw his body, but gave no reaction, as if he didn't care. Of course, I knew he was the one who follows orders, but he's also the silent type, sometimes looking depressed. But I guess his excellence in combat as well as intelligence gathering brought him into the facility. Nevertheless, I didn't have much time to dwell on his life. I looked around and saw the scientists speaking to each other regarding the experiment. Looking at one of the scientists, I could hear his words crystal clear. But I could also see his face crystal clear as well. He usually shaves his mustache, but I could still see that he missed a tiny spot that appeared to be visible to the naked eye. I couldn't even tell he missed it when I was alive. I held back a laughter nonetheless, as my colleagues and I decided that it's time to leave the facility and see what we can find. I was trying to figure out how to descend, but there was nothing I could do. That's when I discovered that as soon as I thought myself descending down, the thought of it somehow made me descend back down to the floor. Jane and Jack looked surprised, and I told them what I did. They followed suit and were amazed of my discovery. It seems that within the afterlife, your thoughts create a situation or moment for you. To confirm this, I decided to think I'll be at my childhood home. And just like that, I was right there. I could not explain how I've gotten there so fast. Perhaps it was the speed of thought. My old house was a few thousand miles from where I was working. Suddenly, Jane appeared behind me, followed by Jack. She explained that she thought of being next to me, and then it happened. Jack thought the same thing. This was an interesting discovery, and this is something we needed to relay to our superiors once this experiment is over. I turned to look again at my house, and I could see that it had been abandoned. No one else lived in that house for 35 years, ever since my parents have passed. I pray that they're in heaven or someplace better, and not in that demonic thing operated by those devils. Understanding that we could move where our thoughts take us, I decided we should think ourselves flying forward. And we did. As we started flying, I could hear Jack screaming as he seemed like he was about to hit a building. but to his surprise, he phased through it, which prompted a reminder that we don't have our physical bodies, which is why we pass through the solid structure. We gathered as much intel as we can throughout this experience, thinking of places to be at, only to be there instantly, as well as manually flying ourselves for the fun of it. We even saw people who have deceased, or are currently performing what is called astral projection. I began to marvel at the sight of everything in this world, along with its beauty. This is when I had this one idea. The very same idea I regret having now. I decided, what if we went out into space while in the afterlife? What would space be like? Will it be just as beautiful? Jane and Jack had their eyes wide, never thinking such a thing could be possible. But what if there's no air? What if we can breathe in space? Jack said. Why would we need air when we don't have our bodies? I asked. Come to think of it, the whole time we were experimenting within the afterlife, we didn't even have a nose or lungs. We all thought of this, but we still appeared to be breathing the same way we did while we were alive. But given that my colleagues were afraid to go up there, I then decided I should go up into space. I was anxious to think myself being in space, so I decided to fly up ahead and use my thoughts to make myself go up faster and faster. At that moment, I was in space, and I could see the moon clearly. It looked more crystal clear, appearing like a ball of rock and sand floating in space. I even looked at the stars, and they appeared brighter than they normally look with any telescope or image. Not to mention, I wasn't in any danger, and I was still breathing apparently. Jane and Jack though shortly appeared next to me, and they were in shock and awe of what they see in space. Everything looks beautiful, Jane said before looking at me. I'm gonna try to go to Jupiter, I said, and decided this time I'll think myself being there. Shortly after that, I was right there. I could see the planet, and I remarked its beauty. However, shortly after a few moments, that wasn't what caught my attention. As I turned to look to my right, I could see what I presumed to be spacecrafts. I became shocked by the experience. It astounded me to see UFOs flying around. And I was just right there. But how? They're literally flying everywhere in space, even around Jupiter. But our cameras, telescopes, and other forms of technology meant for observing space can't detect them? I was astonished. None of this made any sense whatsoever. One of the ships approached, and the beings inside were seen looking at me. One of the figures in the craft looked like a small grey being, and it smiled at me. I would freak out, but strangely, I could feel its energy. It meant no harm to me, and it was exploring space just like me. I was shocked and anxious, but I also had this understanding it has no malicious intent towards me. Then just like that, the being turned the ship and left to wherever it was going. I was still afraid, but happy I'm not in trouble. After a few moments from the ordeal, both Jack and Jane appeared behind me. We're glad you're fine, John. We were beginning to worry if something happened to you. I could sense anxiety coming from you, Jack said. Something did happen. I saw one of those little grey beings in the craft, and it looked at me and smiled before taking off, I told him. I was astonished to see that he laughed and didn't believe me. Nevertheless, I decided not to let it bother me, and we then explored space shortly after. After looking around, we could see that space was more beautiful than it looked. The stars, moons, and suns were crystal clear and brighter. Jane and Jack then noticed other spacecrafts not belonging to us and were taken aback. We then had this thought of being next to Voyager 1's location. And just like that, it happened, and we could see its technological designs. "This thing is huge," Jane said. "And that's what she said," Jack jokingly stated. And that's when Jane got mad and flipped him off before we continued on. She is never the person to do that, but that's only if you don't get on her bad side or say the wrong things to her. I then decided that besides Jupiter, we should also take a look at the other big planets, that being Uranus, Neptune, and of course, Saturn. We thought ourselves being at Uranus and Neptune at first. We could even see the rings around Uranus, which would appear faint to the naked eye. But from our view, it was clearly right there. Neptune, on the other hand, appeared to be a bright blue, watery-looking planet. Not much has happened at first, until we then decided that we should now head over to Saturn. As always, we would be there instantly with mere thought. The planet looked like how it appeared in NASA's space images, but brighter and clearer, including its massive rings. After what felt like a few minutes from observing the spectacles of the planets, I looked toward Jack, only to see a figure approaching behind him. I pointed right behind him, and he and Jane turned to see it. The entity looked human, like us, a female, but having Nordic features. We spoke to the entity. She didn't respond, and she kept staring at us. I could sense fear and anxiety coming from Jack, as he believed that this entity isn't from our world and might hurt us. This drew the attention of the entity, and she began to back slightly away from him. As soon as she saw me, I had to calm myself down and give her a smile, having no hostile or fearful emotions, but emotions filled with peace and harmony, to show that I'm not a threat to the entity. As I did this, the entity turned its attention to me and slowly approached me. She then smiled at me, and she took out her hand. I could feel from her as if she wanted to touch it. Just like that, I did, and I felt her energy. It was peaceful, and I felt she's from an unseen world, hundreds of light years from Earth. To my surprise, she didn't have a name, as they don't use names to identify individuals among their own. I even felt the knowledge she had, imbued within me, especially the knowledge on how she astral projects, and the knowledge on the astral plane itself. She clearly had a much higher level of understanding of the afterlife than we did, and how to navigate it properly. I was even embedded with the knowledge of things humanity still has yet to understand. I could also feel that she was happy to meet me, as I was to her, given that we mean no harm to each other. Unfortunately, the ordeal didn't last long. This is when things took a very dark turn. As she looked at my fellow colleagues for a few moments before turning back to me, she then frowned and looked terrified, right before flying quickly away from us. I wonder what freaked her out. I meant no harm to her. That's when Jack turned to my attention, and his eyes went wide with fear. That was when I realized something. They weren't looking at me. Jack pointed at something behind me. I turned, and to my horror, there was this black pyramid-looking structure heading towards our location. It appeared to be coming from the planet. I could see the beings piloting the craft. One of them looked like a taller gray being, but it wasn't smiling at us. But I could sense its energy. It had this feeling of malice and ill intent towards us. The other figure looked even more horrifying. It resembled a tall reptilian structure with red eyes and yellow slits in them. It had a malice and ill intent toward us, which, to my understanding, dwarfed that of the tall greys. "John, I think we need to go back," Jane said. and I concurred with her. We began to fly away, but Jack was still there, remaining stationary while appearing to be in shock and horror.
"Jack, what the fuck are you doing? We need to get out of here!"
I yelled. Jack then snapped out of it and looked to our attention. He started heading towards our location. But at that moment, the pyramid-shaped craft emitted a powerful white light from its center. We all looked at it, and I felt this intense sensation of love and comfort coming from that light. It drew the attention of my two colleagues as well as I. But then, I remembered who was piloting the crafts and the malice and ill intent they gave off. I snapped out of it, but Jane and Jack were heading towards the craft.
"Jane, stop! That's a trick!"
I yelled. That's when Jane turned to my attention and suddenly snapped out of it after hearing my voice. Jack, on the other hand, was still being drawn into the light.
"Jack, stop!"
I yelled out, but he didn't listen. As he got closer and closer, Jane went after him to try and pull him away. That's when the light on the craft got much stronger and brighter, drawing Jane's attention once again. A sudden thought burst into my mind upon looking at this. The entity I previously met knew about this craft, and I understood why she was fearful. That craft is obviously a trapping mechanism for souls, and from further knowledge I gained from her, souls were being kept inside small containers inside those ships and are used as nothing more than batteries. She was warned about the beings operating the crafts, as they're said to have ill intent towards other beings, including us. After being aware of this, I yelled to Jane and Jack. Only this time, Jane wasn't responding, as the light and the effects that it had on them were much stronger. As they got to the end, the light then shut off, revealing an opening within the craft where Jack and Jane went in. Shortly after, I could sense Jack and Jane finally snap out of it, only to be too late. I could sense they were being forcibly taken by other beings inside the craft and forced to undergo a powerful shock treatment that affects their souls. This treatment was capable of wiping their minds clean of previous experiences, causing permanent amnesia. As that wasn't horrifying enough, the beings piloting the craft turned their attention towards me. I began to worry and take off as fast as I can, only to be chased down by the craft that was coming at me much quicker. Just as I thought I would get caught next, I suddenly felt myself being pulled back to my body in a mere instant. Just like that, I suddenly woke back up on the bed. The scientists were happy to see I was awake, but they appeared to be having trouble bringing back Jack and Jane. I looked at their bodies, and I began to sob. The scientists had no idea what just happened, but I knew the truth. Jack and Jane were now gone.
"They're dead,"
I said in a crying mess. What? How? Did the prototypes fail? One scientist then asked anxiously.
"No, they were taken by those evil creatures. Those devils,"
I said out of anger. But they didn't believe me. They simply assumed I was suffering from mass hysteria.
"I'm telling you the fucking truth, goddammit. Jack and Jane are dead for good,"
I said out of rage.
"That's enough,"
said one of my superiors. "Come with us to the debriefing room," he then instructed me. In the debriefing room, I told them everything we had seen and experienced. I even told them of the craft that took both Jack and Jane. All of the experiences that occurred, especially my greeting with the Nordic entity and those evil things. All except one of my superiors walked out of the debriefing room without saying a word. I suppose none of them believed a word I said. That was until the remaining superior held up a folder and put it in front of me. "Open it," he said. I did. And as I did that, it had pictures. I felt my heart pound rapidly for the first time. They were pictures of that same craft, the one piloted by those devils. And it's clear they were taken by a camera capable of seeing things we simply can't see with the naked eye. They come to our world from time to time, he said, and I listened in. We had no idea why they're here, but it seems your descriptions of the craft matched the one we had in the pictures. I figured that you would encounter them, which is why I brought these pictures. Now we know its purpose. It shocked me to realize our military somehow knew about them, and the fact we were put into experimentation through this made my blood boil. You mean to tell me we participated in this experiment just so you could get an idea of what that craft is for? Did you consider any repercussions about this? Seriously, what the fuck is going on? I asked in a mix of frustration and confusion. He sighed and told me everything. It was not your initiative to go out into space and encounter those crafts. Your mission was clear: to investigate on this world what the existence is like in the afterlife. After being informed of everything you told us, this seems to explain why most crafts belonging to other beings don't operate in the same physical reality as us, but they do manifest in our world on occasion. I find it strange and defiant of all scientific and logical explanations, but I suppose the existence works in ways we still have yet to understand. With that being said, this also managed to provide knowledge on those pyramid-shaped crafts we were keeping an eye on. One of our previous test dummies decided to test out the prototype, and he got a glimpse of the afterlife, providing us with similar details of your experiences. But unfortunately, the poor soul came back to us, shaken with fear. He described the same exact thing you told us, and your knowledge on them confirmed to us that they're extremely hostile. He refused to undergo another experiment and shortly became clinically insane before being sent to an asylum to receive treatment. So, it was then decided to find new subjects, that being you three. So I guess I was nothing more than a lab rat, forced to endure the most likely risk I would be caught by that craft and never come back. Is that it? I said. As I said, it was not your initiative. I suppose when we continue the experiments, our priority is to inform future participants to not go into space and to avoid those specific crafts for their own safety. My superior then told me, before he walked out, leaving me in the room by myself with my own thoughts. I admit, I was pissed off. Even though it wasn't really my mission to investigate the craft, the fact that he knew about it without telling us made me angry. What made it worse was knowing that Jane and Jack are now gone due to this. And as I said, I blame myself for it. Those evil creatures. I hope that one day, they pay for their transgressions upon humanity and other beings. But for now, I'm left with nothing but sadness, heartbreak, and my sanity severely damaged from the horrifying experience. The only bright thing about this ordeal is that Jack and Jane are commemorated for their bravery, and Jane's family have been properly compensated. To be honest, that compensation won't fix the fact she's completely gone for good, never able to see her husband and children ever again. Here I am, 5 years later, retired, but still traumatized from that experience, stuck with nothing but wishful thinking that Jane and Jack managed to escape that craft, saved by other beings, or if God had smite those monsters for their actions. I now believe that hell isn't exactly a specific place or realm, nor a place filled with brimstones and fires, but something which also surrounds us, even throughout space. I'm not sure what will happen to me when I die, because now, for the first time in my life, I'm afraid of death. I'm afraid of the possibility that I will be next. I even fear for my wife and children of this, since none of them believe me. They thought I had gone insane. But I know what I saw. I pray to God that He provides me and my family a safe passage into heaven once my time finally arrives. But sometimes I can't help but think that those devils are sitting above my house, unseen, waiting for me to die. And then claim me next.